The apartment smelled like soy sauce and something burnt. I sat cross-legged on the floor near the tiny Christmas tree, watching my grandmother across the room. She'd been sitting on the edge of the worn sofa for almost an hour, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes downcast. No one had asked her a single question. No one had even really looked at her. It was Christmas Eve, and the living room was packed with people. My aunts, uncles, cousins, all crowded around the small dinner table my mom had set up in the middle of the apartment. The walls were lined with faded family photos, pictures from when my grandfather was still alive, when things were different. The lights from the street outside flickered through the thin curtains, casting strange shadows across everyone's faces. My uncle was talking loudly about his new car. My aunt laughed at something, her voice sharp and cutting through the air like glass. And Grandma Lien just sat there, silent. I watched as my mom walked right past her with a plate of food, not even glancing down. I watched as my cousin bumped into her chair and didn't apologize. It was like she wasn't even there. I felt something twist in my chest. I was 14, and I didn't have the words for what I was feeling yet, but I knew it wasn't right. I knew something was deeply, horribly wrong with how my family treated her. She was 75 years old. She'd raised them. She'd worked her whole life for them. And now they acted like she was invisible. This had been going on for 3 years now, ever since Grandpa died. 4 major family dinners where no one asked her a single question. 17 Sunday mornings, sitting in the same church pew, 3 rows behind everyone else while my mom and uncle sat up front. 2 birthdays completely forgotten, not even a card. 1 hospitalization last spring when she fell and broke her wrist, and only I came to visit. My mom said she was too busy with work. My uncle didn't even call. Grandma's fingers moved slightly, tracing the small silver cross on her necklace. I'd seen her do that 100 times before. It was her way of praying, of grounding herself when everything around her felt chaotic. I wondered what she was praying for. I wondered if God heard her. I wanted to say something. I wanted to stand up and tell everyone to look at her, to ask her how she was doing, to pull up a chair and actually let her be part of the dinner. But I didn't, because I knew what would happen if I did. The room would go silent. My mom would give me that look, the one that said, "Not now, Mai, not here." And my uncle would probably say something dismissive, something about respecting our elders by not causing trouble. That's how it always went. Silence was easier, silence was safer. But as I watched Grandma Lien sit there alone in a room full of her own family, I felt something crack inside me. Some part of me that had always just gone along with things, always kept quiet, always followed the rules. It was starting to break. A few days before that Christmas dinner, I'd been in Grandma Lien's apartment by myself. It was late afternoon, and the sun was setting, casting this soft orange light through her small living room window. She was sitting on the same sofa where she'd sit on Christmas Eve, but this time she was alone. Really alone. I'd stopped by to drop off some groceries my mom had sent, but when I walked in, I heard her voice. She was praying out loud. "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear?" Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper, but steady. "The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid?" Psalm 27,001. I stood in the doorway, not wanting to interrupt. Her Bible was open on her lap, the pages worn and marked with notes in the margins. Her cross necklace caught the light, glinting softly as she moved. "When the wicked advance against me to devour me, it is my enemies and my foes who will stumble and fall. Though an army besiege me, my heart will not fear." Psalm 27,002-3. She paused, her voice catching slightly. I realized she was reading Psalm 27. I'd heard it before in church, but I'd never heard it like this. Raw, desperate, personal. It wasn't just a prayer. It was a lifeline. She looked up and saw me standing there. For a moment, she looked embarrassed, like I'd caught her doing something private, but then she just smiled softly and closed her Bible. "Hi, Mai," she said, her voice gentle. "Hi, Grandma." I set the groceries down on the small kitchen counter. I didn't mean to interrupt. "You didn't interrupt," she said. "I was just talking to God." I sat down on the floor near her, the way I always did when I visited. "Do you pray like that a lot?" She nodded. "Every day. Sometimes it's the only conversation I have." That hit me harder than I expected. The only conversation. I thought about all the times I'd seen her at family gatherings, sitting alone while everyone else talked and laughed. I thought about how my mom would call her maybe once a week, if that. I thought about how my uncle never visited anymore. "Does it help?" I asked. "Praying, I mean." She looked at me for a long time before answering. "I don't know if it changes my circumstances," she said, "but it reminds me that I'm not forgotten, that God sees me even when no one else does." I didn't know what to say to that. I wanted to tell her that I saw her, that I noticed her. But I was just a kid, and I didn't know if that mattered. One week before Christmas, I'd done something I wasn't supposed to do. I'd gone to the church youth group. My family didn't know about it. My mom thought I was at a friend's house studying. If she found out I was going to church meetings without permission, she'd be furious. In our family, church was something you did on Sundays when you were told to. It wasn't something you sought out on your own. But I'd heard about the youth group from a girl at school, and something in me was desperate to go. I needed to talk to someone who might understand what I was feeling. I needed to know if faith could be something more than just going through the motions. The church basement was warm and bright. There were maybe 15 other teenagers there, sitting in a circle on old folding chairs. A youth leader named Sarah welcomed me with a hug, which surprised me. No one at my regular church ever hugged anyone. "We're so glad you're here, Mai," she said, and I could tell she meant it. That night, they talked about hope, about what it means to trust God even when life doesn't make sense, about how Jesus cares for people who feel alone and forgotten. I sat there, barely speaking, but soaking in every word like I was dying of thirst. Sarah stood in the center of the circle, her voice warm and honest. "Here's what I want you to hear tonight," she said. "Jesus doesn't just see the people everyone else sees. He sees the invisible ones, the forgotten ones. The ones sitting alone in the corner while everyone else is laughing. And he doesn't just see them, he moves toward them." Something in my chest tightened. I thought of Grandma Lien. At one point, Sarah asked if anyone had prayer requests. A boy across from me talked about his dad's drinking problem. A girl shared about her depression, and everyone just listened. No one told them to be quiet. No one said they were dishonoring their families by talking about hard things. I wanted to say something about Grandma Lien. I wanted to ask them to pray for her, for my family, for the way I felt every time I saw how they treated her. But I couldn't. The words stuck in my throat. After the meeting, Sarah pulled me aside. "How are you doing, Mai?" "Really?" I shrugged. "I'm okay." She didn't push, but she gave me a small card with her phone number. "If you ever need to talk, I'm here. No judgment, no pressure, just someone who cares." I put the card in my pocket and felt something warm in my chest. Maybe this was what faith was supposed to feel like, not the cold, rigid rules I'd grown up with, but something alive, something that actually saw people. The night before Christmas dinner, everything got worse. By that point, I'd already seen Grandma praying alone with her Bible, found something different at the youth group, and watched my family treat her like furniture. I kept thinking something had to give. I just didn't know what. Grandma Lien's adult children, my mom and my uncle, stopped by her apartment briefly that evening. I was there, helping her set up a small nativity scene on her bookshelf. My uncle barely looked at her when he walked in. "We need to talk about the lease," he said, not even saying hello first. "What about it?" Grandma asked, her voice careful. "You need to renew it by next week or they're going to raise the rent. I'm not going to cover the difference, so you need to figure it out." My mom nodded in agreement. "You should have taken care of this earlier, Mom." I watched Grandma's face. She didn't argue. She just nodded. "I'll take care of it." They left maybe 5 minutes later, barely saying goodbye. Grandma stood by the door after they'd gone, her hand on the doorknob, her shoulders slumped. "Grandma," I started, but I didn't know what to say. She turned to me with a tired smile. "It's okay, Mai. They're busy." But it wasn't okay, and we both knew it. About an hour later, There was another knock on the door. This time it was Pastor Chen from our church. He was a short man with graying hair and a voice that always sounded like he was giving a sermon, even in casual conversation. Through the thin walls, I could hear the neighbor's television playing some game show, the volume too loud. "Good evening, Lien," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "My, I need to speak with you privately." Grandma excused herself to the kitchen. I heard her turn on the faucet, filling the kettle even though no one had asked for tea. Pastor Chen sat down on the sofa, his hands folded in his lap, and gestured for me to sit across from him in the worn armchair. "I've heard you've been attending some meetings at other churches," he said, his voice gentle but with an edge underneath. "Youth groups that aren't affiliated with our congregation." My stomach dropped. Someone had told him. "I just wanted to," I started. "I understand you're young and curious about faith. That's good. But you need to understand that unity in the church is very important. And part of that unity means not causing division or conflict within our families." I stared at him confused. "I'm not causing conflict. I know you care about your grandmother," he continued, his voice taking on that pastoral tone like he was counseling me. "And I know you see how the family dynamics can be complicated. But sometimes the most loving thing we can do is forgive quickly and keep peace. Your grandmother wouldn't want you to stir up trouble on her behalf." "But no one's treating her right," I said, my voice breaking slightly. "They ignore her. They don't care." His voice was firmer now. "Forgiveness doesn't require confrontation. It requires grace. Your family has their own relationship with your grandmother, and it's not your place to interfere. Do you understand?" I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell him that forgiveness without truth wasn't real forgiveness. But I was 14, and he was the pastor, and I had been taught my whole life to respect authority. So I just nodded. "Good," he said, standing up. "I'm glad we had this talk. Remember, my church unity and family peace are worth protecting. Don't let your emotions lead you astray." He left, and I sat there on the sofa feeling like someone had just tied weights around my chest. Later that night, I knelt by my bed in my small room, the lights off except for the glow from the street lamp outside my window. I'd been crying, and my face felt hot and swollen. I didn't know how to pray. I'd never really prayed on my own before, not like Grandma did. But I felt so desperate, so lost, that I just started talking. "God," I whispered into the dark, "I don't know what to do. Everyone's telling me to stay quiet, but it feels wrong. It feels like Grandma's drowning and no one wants to throw her a rope." I thought about what Sarah had said at youth group. I thought about the way people there actually listened to each other, actually cared. Then I remembered something I'd heard in a sermon once, not at my church, but at the youth group. Sarah had read it from the Bible, Matthew 11. Jesus said, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." I grabbed my phone and pulled up the verse online, reading the rest of it. "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Matthew 11:28-30, rest. That's what Jesus was offering. Not more rules, not more pressure to stay silent and keep peace at any cost, but rest. I closed my eyes, feeling tears slip down my cheeks again. "Jesus," I whispered, "if you really care about people who are weary and burdened, if you really see people who are invisible and forgotten, then please help me, help Grandma. Show me what to do." I didn't hear an audible voice. I didn't feel a sudden rush of peace, but something in me shifted, something small but real. Like a tiny flame lighting up in the middle of a dark room. Maybe faith wasn't about having all the answers. Maybe it wasn't about staying quiet and keeping everyone else comfortable. Maybe it was about trusting that Jesus actually meant what he said, that he saw the weary, the burdened, the forgotten, that he cared about people like Grandma Lien, that he cared about people like me. I stayed there on my knees for a long time, the weight on my chest lifting just slightly. I didn't know what would happen at Christmas dinner tomorrow. I didn't know if I'd have the courage to speak up or if I'd just sit there like always, watching Grandma suffer in silence. But I knew one thing. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. I couldn't keep being part of the silence that was slowly killing her. Something had to change. And maybe, just maybe, Jesus was inviting me to be part of that change, no matter how scary it was. Christmas Day arrived like a storm I'd been watching build on the horizon. I was 14 years old, and I'd spent the last few days praying for courage. I wasn't sure I had. My grandmother, Lien, had been invisible to her own family for 3 years now, ignored, dismissed, forgotten, and I'd been part of the silence. But something in me had shifted. I couldn't pretend anymore. The apartment was packed again, just like Christmas Eve. Same cramped living room, same worn sofa where Grandma sat at the edge. Same faded photos on the walls. My aunts and uncles filled the space with loud voices and forced laughter. The smell of roasted duck and steamed rice hung heavy in the air. I sat near Grandma watching, waiting. My uncle was in the middle of some story about work, gesturing wildly with his hands. My mom laughed, leaning back in her chair. And then my uncle said it, something that made my stomach drop. "You know, Mom's gotten so forgiveful lately," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Last week she called me 3 times about the same thing. I finally just stopped answering." A few people chuckled. Grandma Lien's face went still, her hands folded tightly in her lap. My mom nodded. "She does that to me too. I think she just wants attention." Something snapped inside me. "That's not fair," I said. My voice came out shaky but clear. The room went quiet. Everyone turned to look at me. "What did you say?" my uncle asked, his eyebrows raised. I said, "That's not fair." My heart was pounding so hard I thought everyone could hear it. Grandma's not being forgetful for attention. She's lonely. She calls because no one visits her. No one talks to her. No one even looks at her when she's sitting right here. My mom's face went red. "Mai, that's enough." "No, it's not enough." I was shaking now, but I couldn't stop. "You all treat her like she's invisible, like she doesn't matter. And she's your mother. She raised you. Mai." My mom's voice was sharp as glass. "You're being disrespectful. Go to your room." I looked at Grandma Lien. Her eyes were wet, but she was staring down at her hands, not saying anything. I wanted her to speak up. I wanted her to defend herself. But she just sat there, silent, the way she always did. I stood up and left the room, my chest tight with anger and shame and something else I couldn't name yet. That evening, after most of the family had left and the apartment felt hollow and cold, there was a knock on the door. I opened it to find Pastor Chen standing there, his face set in that same calm, controlled expression he always wore. "Mai," he said, "we need to talk." I let him in, my stomach sinking. Grandma was in the kitchen cleaning up, and Pastor Chen gestured for me to sit down on the sofa. "I heard about what happened at dinner," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Your mother called me." "Of course she did." "Mai, I understand you're passionate about your grandmother's situation. But what you did today, embarrassing your family in front of everyone, that's not how we handle conflict in the church. That's not how we honor our elders." "But they were being cruel," I said, my voice breaking. "They were making fun of her." "They were having a conversation," Pastor Chin corrected, "and you turned it into a confrontation. Do you know how that reflects on our church? On your grandmother's testimony?" I stared at him, confused. Her testimony? When we cause division in our families, when we stir up conflict instead of pursuing peace, we damage our witness. Forgiveness, Mai, means letting go. It means not holding grudges. It means trusting God to change hearts without forcing the issue. But how can anyone's heart change if no one ever says anything's wrong? Pastor Chin's jaw tightened. Your grandmother has made her peace with the situation. She's chosen forgiveness. You need to do the same. Church unity depends on us not airing our family struggles publicly. Do you understand? I didn't answer. Because, no, I didn't understand. Not anymore. I need you to apologize to your family, he continued, and I need you to commit to keeping family matters private. Can you do that? I felt the weight of his expectation pressing down on me like a hand on my chest. I thought about the youth group, about Sarah's words. Ah, Jesus sees the invisible ones. I thought about Grandma's prayer. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? I'll think about it, I finally said. Pastor Chen frowned, but he stood up. Don't take too long, Mai. These things have consequences. The Sunday after Christmas, I sat in the church sanctuary during the morning service, feeling like I was barely holding myself together. My mom hadn't spoken to me since the dinner. My uncle had sent a text calling me disrespectful. Grandma Lien had just smiled sadly when I tried to apologize to her for making things worse. But that morning, something unexpected happened. The pastor, not Pastor Chen, but the senior pastor who usually gave the sermons, spoke about Matthew 11. The same passage I'd been clinging to all week. Jesus says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest," he read from the pulpit. Matthew 11:28. Notice who Jesus is calling, not the powerful, not the successful, not the ones who have it all together. He's calling the weary, the burdened, the ones carrying weight they were never meant to carry alone. I felt tears prick my eyes. Jesus sees you when others don't, the pastor continued. He sees the neglected, the overlooked, the ones sitting in rooms full of people feeling completely alone. And he doesn't just see you, he invites you to bring your burdens to him, to find rest in him. After the service, I stayed in the sanctuary for a long time. The building had mostly emptied out, just a few older women cleaning up in the back. I knelt in the pew and prayed, my forehead pressed against the wooden seat in front of me. Jesus, I whispered. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Everyone's telling me to stay quiet, but it feels like staying quiet is killing Grandma. It feels like the silence is a lie. Please, please show me what to do. I didn't hear a voice, but I felt something, a quiet steadiness, like someone had placed a hand on my shoulder, a sense that I wasn't alone in this. A few days later, I went to visit Grandma Lien in the afternoon. The apartment was quiet, sunlight streaming through the windows. She was sitting on the sofa with a cup of tea, staring at nothing. Hi, Grandma, I said softly. She looked up and smiled. Hi, Mai, I'm glad you're here. I sat down on the floor beside her, the way I always did. I'm sorry about Christmas dinner. I didn't mean to make everything worse. You didn't make anything worse, she said gently. You told the truth. That's brave. It didn't feel brave. It felt like I just made everyone angry. She was quiet for a moment, then she set down her tea and stood up slowly. Come with me. I want to show you something. I followed her to her bedroom, a small space barely big enough for a twin bed and a dresser. She opened the closet and pulled out a cardboard box from the top shelf, dusty and worn at the edges. I'd been meaning to go through these, she said, setting the box on the bed. Maybe it's time. I helped her open it. Inside were dozens of letters, old yellowed envelopes with Grandma's handwriting on them. Some were addressed to my mom, some to my uncle, some to people I didn't recognize. What are these? I asked. Letters I wrote, Grandma said quietly. Over the years, after your grandfather died, when I was feeling forgotten, I picked up one addressed to my mom and looked at Grandma. Can I read it? She nodded. I opened the envelope carefully and unfolded the letter inside. The date at the top was from 2 years ago. Dear Anna, Sons, I hope this letter finds you well. I've been praying for you every day, asking God to give you strength and peace. I know you're busy with work and with I know life is hard. I wanted to tell you that I miss you. I miss our conversations. I miss when you used to visit more often, when we'd sit together and talk about everything. I know things changed after your father died, but I want you to know that I'm still here. I'm still your mother. I still love you. Me. I pray that someday we can sit together again, really talk, really listen to each other. I'm not angry, I just miss you. X. Love, Mom. My hands were shaking. Did you send this? Grandma shook her head. I wrote it, but I never sent any of them. I was afraid they'd be angry with me for complaining, afraid they'd think I was being needy. I opened another letter, then another. Each one was the same, full of love, full of longing, full of prayers for family unity and healing, letters asking to be seen, letters hoping for connection, letters that were never sent because Grandma was too afraid of being a burden. Grandma, I whispered, tears streaming down my face, why didn't you send them? Because I thought if I just prayed enough, if I just loved them enough, if I just waited quietly enough, things would get better on their own. Her voice cracked, but they didn't. I sat there on the bed, surrounded by years of unspoken pain, and I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just about one Christmas dinner. This wasn't just about a few rude comments. This was years of emotional neglect, years of my grandmother loving her children fiercely while they slowly forgot she existed. Grandma, I said, my voice steady for the first time in days. We have to tell them. They need to know. She looked at me with fear in her eyes. They'll be angry. Maybe, I said, but they need to see this. They need to know what they've done, not because we want to hurt them, but because the Bible says we're supposed to carry each other's burdens, right? I remembered something from a sermon. Galatians 6, bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. Galatians 62, Grandma's eyes filled with tears. I'm so tired, Mai. So tired of carrying this alone. Then let me help you carry it, I said. Let's tell the truth together. That same afternoon, I called my mom, then my uncle. Then I texted some of the church small group members who'd been at Christmas dinner. I told them we needed to talk, that Grandma had something important to share. They came reluctantly. My mom arrived with her arms crossed, clearly annoyed. My uncle looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. A few church friends came too, probably out of curiosity more than care. Pastor Chin showed up last, his face carefully neutral. We gathered in Grandma's living room, the same room where she'd sat invisible at Christmas dinner. But this time, I made sure she was in the center. I held the box of letters in my lap. Thank you for coming, I started, my voice shaking. I know this is uncomfortable, but Grandma has something she needs you to see. I pulled out the first letter and began to read it aloud. My mom's face went pale. My uncle looked down at his hands. The room was completely silent except for my voice reading Grandma's words, words full of love and longing and unacknowledged pain. When I finished the first letter, I pulled out another, and another. 3 years, I said, my voice breaking. 3 years of letters Grandma wrote, but never sent, because she was afraid you'd be angry. 3 years of her praying and hoping and loving you while you barely acknowledged she existed. Mai, that's enough, Pastor Chen said sharply. This is not. No. I cut him off and I saw his eyes widen in surprise. This is exactly what needs to happen. You told me to forgive and stay quiet, but forgiveness can't happen if we pretend there's nothing to forgive. Truth has to come first. My mom was crying now, her hands over her face. My uncle's jaw was clenched tight. We didn't know, my mom whispered. Mom, we didn't. You didn't ask, Grandma said softly. It was the first time I'd heard her speak up in years. You didn't look. The room felt like it might split open. Some people looked ashamed, others looked angry. Pastor Chen's face was tight with barely controlled frustration. This is divisive, he said. This is exactly what I warned against. Or maybe, one of the younger women from the small group said quietly, this is what honesty looks like. And maybe that's what we've been missing. The conversation that followed was messy, painful, raw. Some people apologized. Some made excuses. Some just sat in stunned silence. But for the first time, the truth was out in the open. The silence was broken. That night, alone in my bedroom, I collapsed. The adrenaline drained away and left me hollow and terrified. I'd done what I thought was right, but I had no idea what would come next. My mom was barely speaking to me. My uncle had left angry. Pastor Chen had pulled me aside before he left and told me I'd made a serious mistake. I knelt by my bed, my whole body shaking. God, I prayed through tears, I don't know if I did the right thing. Everyone's angry. Everything's broken. I thought truth was supposed to set people free, but it just feels like I set a bomb off in the middle of my family. I thought about Grandma's letters. I thought about the years she'd spent silent, afraid, invisible. I can't go back to pretending, I whispered. I can't. But I'm so scared. I'm scared they'll never forgive me. I'm scared I've ruined everything. I stayed there for a long time, crying and praying and wrestling with God. No clear answers came, no sudden peace, just the heavy knowledge that I'd done something that couldn't be undone. And somewhere, beneath the fear and exhaustion, a tiny flicker of hope. Because at least now, the truth was out. At least now, Grandma Lien wasn't carrying it alone anymore. 1 week after I read Grandma's letters to my family, I was still trying to understand what had actually happened. I was 15 now. My birthday had passed somewhere in the middle of the chaos, and everything felt different. The confrontation had cracked something open that couldn't be closed again. Some family members were furious. Some were ashamed. And me? I was exhausted, but somehow more alive than I'd felt in years. That week, our church small group was studying Luke 15, the story of the prodigal son. I almost didn't go. After everything that had happened, I wasn't sure I belonged there anymore. But Sarah, the youth leader, had texted me personally, "We need you. Please come." The basement room felt different that night. There were maybe 12 of us sitting in the usual circle, but the air felt heavier, more honest. Sarah opened her Bible and read from Luke 15, the parable where the younger son demands his inheritance, wastes it all, and comes home expecting nothing, only to find his father running toward him with open arms. The father saw him from a distance, Sarah read, her voice soft. And his heart went out to him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. Luke 3:20. I felt tears prick my eyes. I'd heard this story 100 times before, but this time something about it landed differently. After she finished reading, Sarah looked around the circle. This is a story about forgiveness and restoration, but it's also a story about what it costs to pursue healing. The father didn't pretend nothing had happened. He acknowledged the brokenness. And then he chose love anyway. There was a long silence. Then one of the older teens, Marcus, spoke up. But what about the older brother? He was angry because the father forgave the younger son so easily. Doesn't he have a point? Sarah nodded. He does. The older brother's anger is valid. The younger son's choices hurt everyone. But notice what the father says to him. Everything I have is yours. The father's love isn't limited. There's enough grace for both sons. I thought about my family, about my mom and uncle who'd neglected Grandma for years, about Grandma who'd carried that pain silently, about me, caught in the middle, trying to figure out what forgiveness even looked like. Can I say something? The words came out before I could stop them. Everyone turned to look at me. I don't know if anyone here heard what happened with my family. I started, my voice shaking. But a week ago, I found out my grandmother had been writing letters to my mom and uncle for years. Letters they never saw because she was too afraid to send them. Letters full of love and pain and hope. And when I showed them to the family, everything exploded. I could feel my throat tightening, but I kept going. I don't know how this story ends yet. I don't know if my family can be restored like the prodigal son's family. I don't even know if they want to be. But I guess I'm wondering, what does forgiveness look like when the people who hurt you don't even realize they've hurt you? What does restoration look like when some people are still denying there's anything to restore? Sarah's eyes were gentle. Those are exactly the right questions, Mai. A few days later, I met with Elder Liu in his small office at the church. He was in his 60s, a quiet man who'd always been kind to me. Sarah had suggested I talk to him about everything that was happening. His office smelled like old books and green tea. He gestured for me to sit in the worn armchair across from his desk, and he poured me a cup of tea without asking if I wanted one. "Sarah told me you've been carrying a heavy burden," he said gently. I nodded, wrapping my hands around the warm cup. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do now. Everyone's angry with me. Pastor Chen told me I was divisive. My uncle won't return my calls. My mom barely looks at me. And Grandma says she's glad I spoke up, but I can see how tired she is." Elder Lu was quiet for a moment, sipping his tea. Then he opened his Bible to Galatians 6. "Listen to this," he said. "Brothers and sisters, if someone is caught in a sin, you who live by the Spirit should restore that person gently. But watch yourselves, or you also may be tempted. Carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ." Galatians 6:1-2. He looked up at me. "Do you know what strikes me about this passage?" I shook my head. "It says to restore gently, not harshly, not with judgment or condemnation. But it also says to restore. That means we don't ignore sin. We don't pretend brokenness doesn't exist. We address it, but we do it with the Spirit's gentleness." "But what if they don't want to be restored?" I asked. "What if they think I'm the one who's wrong?" "Then you keep carrying the burden the way Jesus calls you to," Elder Lu said. "You speak truth. You offer grace. You set boundaries when you need to, and you trust God with the outcome." He leaned forward, his voice kind but firm. "Mai, you didn't create this brokenness. Your grandmother's pain existed long before you found those letters. You just brought it into the light. And yes, that's uncomfortable. It's costly, but it's also the only way healing can start." I felt something loosen in my chest. "So I didn't do the wrong thing?" "You did a brave thing," he said. "A loving thing. Now the hard part is continuing to love even when it doesn't feel like it's changing anything." The following week, I went back to the small group. This time, I knew I needed to share more, not because I wanted attention, but because I was starting to understand that hiding my family's brokenness was just another form of the silence that had hurt Grandma for so long. Sarah had asked me ahead of time if I'd be willing to share my story more fully. I'd said yes, even though the thought terrified me. When we gathered in the circle that night, I could see Pastor Chen sitting in the back corner, his arms crossed. He looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. But Elder Lyle was there too, sitting beside him, and his presence made me feel less alone. "Last week, some of you heard me mention my family's situation," I started, my hands trembling in my lap. "I want to tell you the whole story because I think we've been taught to keep family problems private, to smile and pretend everything's fine, but I don't think that's what Jesus calls us to do." I told them everything, about Grandma's 3 years of neglect, about the letters, about the Christmas dinner confrontation, about how hard it had been to speak truth when everyone wanted me to stay quiet. Halfway through, Pastor Chen stood up. "This is inappropriate. Family matters shouldn't be." "Brother Chen," Elder Lu interrupted gently but firmly, "let her finish. This is exactly what Galatians 6 talks about, bearing one another's burdens." Pastor Chen's face went red, but he sat back down. When I finished, the room was silent for a long moment. Then Sarah spoke. "Thank you for trusting us with this, Mai. I know that took courage." One of the girls across from me, someone I'd never really talked to before, wiped tears from her eyes. "My family does the same thing to my grandpa," she said quietly. "I've never had the guts to say anything." Another guy nodded. "My parents haven't spoken to my aunt in 5 years because of some argument no one will talk about. Everyone just pretends it's normal." The conversation that followed was raw and honest in a way I'd never experienced at church before. People shared their own family wounds, their own struggles with forgiveness and boundaries and truth-telling. And slowly I realized something. By breaking the silence about my own family, I'd given other people permission to break theirs too. Pastor Chen left before the meeting ended, but when I glanced at Elder Lu, he gave me a small, approving nod. A few days later, Grandma and I sat together in her living room. The afternoon light streamed through the windows, soft and golden. We'd been talking for an hour about everything that had happened. The letters, the confrontation, the fallout. I need to ask you something, I said. Are you angry with me for stirring everything up? Grandma took my hand. No, Mai, I'm grateful. For the first time in 3 years, I don't feel invisible anymore. Even if things don't change with your mother and uncle, something has already changed. The truth is out. I'm not carrying it alone. But what do we do now? I asked. Do we just wait? Hope they come around? We set boundaries, Grandma said. Her voice was steadier than I'd heard in months. We love them. We pray for them. But we don't go back to pretending. We don't make ourselves small and invisible just to keep false peace. I thought about that. How do we do that without being bitter? Grandma reached for her worn Bible on the coffee table and opened it to Romans 8. Listen to this, she said. The Spirit you received does not make you slaves so that you live in fear again. Rather, the Spirit you received brought about your adoption to sonship. And by him we cry, Abba, Father. The Spirit himself testifies with our spirit that we are God's children. Romans 8:15.6. She looked at me, her eyes bright with tears. For 3 years, I let myself believe I was worth less because my children didn't see me. I let their neglect define who I was. But this passage reminds us, that our identity isn't in whether our family loves us well. Our identity is in being God's children, God's beloved. So we forgive them, I said slowly, but we don't forget what happened. We don't pretend it didn't hurt. Exactly, Grandma said. Forgiveness doesn't mean erasing boundaries. It means trusting God to heal the wound while we protect ourselves from more harm. We prayed together then, both of us crying, both of us holding on to the truth that we were seen, really seen by God, even if our family couldn't see us yet. Several months later, things had changed in small but significant ways. Not everything, not perfectly, but enough that I could see God's hand in the middle of the mess. Grandma hosted a small dinner one evening. Just her, me, and my mom. My uncle still wasn't ready to come, and I'd learned to accept that. The apartment felt different now, less heavy, more honest. My mom arrived on time, which was new. She brought flowers, which was also new. And when she walked in, she actually looked at Grandma, really looked at her. "Hi, Mom," she said softly. "Hi, Anna," Grandma replied. They hugged. It was awkward and brief, but it was real. During dinner, my mom apologized. Not perfectly, not for everything, but she said the words, "I'm sorry, and I should have been there for you," and I watched Grandma's face soften. "I forgive you," Grandma said quietly, "but things need to be different going forward." My mom nodded. I know. It wasn't a Hollywood ending. It was just a beginning. Small, fragile, real. That same morning, before the dinner, I'd found Grandma sitting by the window in her apartment, her Bible open on her lap, her cross necklace catching the light. "What are you reading?" I asked, sitting beside her. "Psalm 27, she said, smiling. "The same passage I was reading when you first heard me pray. Remember?" I nodded. "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear?" she quoted. Psalm 27,000. Back then, I was praying it out of desperation. Now I'm praying it out of victory. "Victory?" I asked. "Not because everything's fixed," she clarified, "but because I know now, really know, that God sees me. Even when my family didn't. Even when I felt most alone. He was my light, my salvation, and He still is." We prayed together by that window, thanking God for small mercies, for the courage to speak truth, for the grace to forgive, for the hope that healing, real healing, was possible, even if it took longer than we wanted. Later that week, I stood in the church basement small group room one more time. Sarah had asked me to share a prayer before we ended the meeting, and I agreed. The circle felt different now. Elder Lou sat beside Pastor Chin, who was slowly, very slowly learning to listen instead of control. The youth group kids looked at me with respect instead of pity, and Sarah's eyes were proud. I just want to pray for all of us carrying burdens we've been told to keep quiet, I said. For those of us who've been taught that honesty is the same as disrespect, for families trying to heal from years of silence. I closed my eyes. God, thank you for seeing us when no one else does. Thank you for inviting us to carry each other's burdens the way you carry ours. Help us to speak truth with grace. Help us to forgive without forgetting. Help us to trust you when healing doesn't come as fast as we want it to. And remind us every single day that we're your beloved children, no matter what anyone else says or doesn't say. The group echoed, Amen, and I felt the weight of it. The beautiful, hard weight of choosing truth over silence, grace over bitterness, hope over despair. After the meeting, as everyone was packing up, the younger girl who'd shared about her grandfather approached me. Thank you, she said quietly, for going first, for being brave. I think I'm going to talk to my family this week. I hugged her, tears in my eyes. You can do it, and if you need help, we're here. Walking home that night, I thought about everything that had changed in the past few months. I thought about Grandma's letters, about the Christmas dinner confrontation, about Elder Lou's wisdom and Sarah's support, about the slow, painful, beautiful work of healing. I still didn't have all the answers. My family wasn't fully restored. Some relationships were still broken, maybe permanently. But I'd learned something crucial. Following Jesus doesn't always mean keeping peace at any cost. Sometimes it means disrupting false peace to make room for real healing. And in the middle of all the mess and uncertainty, I discovered something even more important. I was seen by God, by Grandma, by a community that chose honesty over pretense. And that was enough. If you're listening to this and you recognize yourself in my story, if you've been carrying burdens alone, if you've been told to stay quiet when you needed to speak, if you're wondering whether truth is worth the cost, I want you to know you're not invisible. God sees you. And maybe, just maybe, He's inviting you to bring your burden into the light, to find people who will help you carry it, and to trust that healing, messy, imperfect, slow healing, is worth every difficult step.